now, but I'm sure that the squirrels will scare them away.
Look, these are the most thrilling things of our lives right now. So,
Yeah. It's
All right.
important stuff.
It's 9:30. I thought we would do something crazy with these Tuesday, Thursday things and like stay on schedule. I don't know. It's not really us. But what the heck? We could try. So we'll kind of go ahead and get started. So Ted, really exciting stuff. We're live streaming on Facebook right now.
Nice.
So yeah, we had our help from our awesome marketing team and people that handle our social media stuff. They were fantastic and get us going this morning. So welcome back, everybody. We're back. For those of you who haven't met me yet or haven't attended one of our webinars or might be joining us new on a live stream, my name is Chad Honeycutt in Evidence-Based Classroom Solutions. And I'm a board certified behavior analyst, and I was also a special education teacher in public schools. Ted, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ted Hoke. I'm a board certified and licensed behavior analyst. I'm a licensed psychologist, licensed professional counselor, and all around swell guy.
He is. Katie?
all right, I'm Katie. I'm a behavior specialist with the company. I was a special education teacher in a self-contained autism room, and I am currently studying to sit the exam to become a BCBA.
Yeah. So we're just kind of here. We're doing these Tuesday, Thursdays. We still haven't quite figured out what we're going to call them. We don't want them to be really formal. We'd love your participation. Ask questions whenever you want to. You can change the topic of what we're talking about if you want to. It's fine. Really just kind of want to throw some ideas out there, kind of inform you about what we know about applied behavior analysis and special education. And I think next week we're going to target talks on trauma. So really try to hit a lot of subjects here, and feel free to give an opinion, share us with people that you know on Facebook. These are free to anyone, so anyone can watch live on Facebook or on our YouTube channel, which they'll be able to access through our Facebook. So on Tuesday, we were talking about kind of ABA coming into public schools, that it's not a matter of if, just when. And, you know, what we kind of concluded was that it already is in schools. I mean, teachers are already doing a lot of things that are ABA-ish and probably just don't have the language or maybe know exactly what they're incorporating specifically to ABA. So we talked about some of the barriers that existed and those preconceived notions. And something came up yesterday when I was working with a teacher, and I wanted to kind of start the day with it. And it's the only IEP that I've ever seen that actually has ABA therapy written into it for a public day school, which was really, really interesting to me for a couple reasons. One, I know a lot of parents want ABA in schools. I mean, that's what everybody, especially if you're a parent of a child with autism. But the reality is there's a limited market, right, Ted? I mean, there's only so many BCBAs in the state of Virginia.
Yeah, no, that's true. But could I change the topic a little bit?
You can, but I want you to answer this question for me first, though, before you change my topic. Because I have a topic. So it's, I don't think of ABA as a therapy, and maybe that's just my mindset.
No, you're right.
But I think that's what kind of shapes the biggest barrier to ABA coming into schools, is that it's seen as a therapy, but I just don't ever conceptualize it as that. And this is Katie's cue to laugh. I use the word conceptualize a lot. We actually have a running record you guys can keep.
He does. It's a good word though, but yeah, it's just a thing.
Take a drink every time he says conceptualize, but it's morning, so we'll use coffee.
Yes, so just espresso shots.
Yeah. No, Chad, you're absolutely right. And the thing is, there are laws of nature, right? The way the universe works. Gravity is there, whether you know it or not, whether you believe it or not. Gravity works the way gravity works. You know, light travels the way light travels, whether you know it or not, whether you believe it or not. It's just how things work. There are laws of behavior too, and it's not some crazy intrapsychic sort of thing or anything. These are general laws of nature. And it's like how everything we say, do, think, or feel is related to stuff around us and the stuff going on inside of us too. Because if it's going on inside of us, it's behavior. And so this stuff is everywhere all the time, all day, like gravity, like light traveling, like sound traveling. You know, all the laws of physics are the same no matter where they are happening. All the laws of chemistry are the same. All the laws of behavior are the same too. And what teaching is changing behavior. It's getting people to do things they couldn't do before, do things better than they did before, not do some things, but do other things instead, do things differently from how they did them before. And these laws of behavior are going on all day, every day, just like gravity, whether you realize it or not, whether you know it or not. And so, you know, people say there's no ABA in the schools. Well, maybe the language isn't there, but these laws of behavior are there. And when stuff works, it's because someone's working with those laws of behavior. Someone changed something and someone learned something. And so it's kind of there in the schools, but people don't know it. But we got to use it to the advantage of those we're serving.
Yeah, and Cammie, aka Bennett Wells, she brings up an interesting question. Do you just incorporate some of the principles into goals and objectives? And what I would like everybody to kind of consider is that the goals are the outcome, the things that we're working towards. What I want to see you incorporate ABA into is how you teach. The philosophies of reinforcement and antecedent-based interventions and how we teach things. Katie, I know, like, for you as a classroom teacher, I mean, you kind of got thrown into a classroom towards the end of the year, and I watched you use a lot of ABA strategies and just principles in the delivery of your instruction, and that really helped get your classroom together.
Oh yeah, that was probably the only reason why I felt like I had any ounce of control, of instructional control, is using that. And I was lucky to have had exposure to ABA as an assistant, and have that guidance going into being a teacher. So yeah, it was definitely extremely helpful, and it was one of the only things that kept me calm in this first few weeks. So, yeah.
And you said two of the best words that I think need to just really be embraced and understood by teachers in classroom settings, and that's instructional control. And it's not this like Dr. Evil thing where I'm going to have control over everything, but you know, there's this myth or this mindset that kids want to learn from us just because we're the teachers, and that doesn't always exist. Sometimes you do have those students that are just driven, right, to do that. And that's fantastic. And we don't ever want to discourage that. But then you have students where we don't have instructional control over. They actually may have more instructional control over a class. And I've seen this in the secondary environment where the problem behavior student, has more instructional control over the classroom than the teacher does, because they're basically controlling all the schedule of reinforcement for the class, you know, and kind of dictating what happens throughout the classroom day. And I think talking about how we establish instructional control is probably one of the greatest strengths of ABA in schools. Ted, you got any thoughts to that?
Oh, yeah, I see the same thing in family therapy when I'm working with families, you know, and which, when you actually watch how things play out, when you watch the processes at play, it's the kid with the problem behaviors who's kind of running the family, because they build everything around this kid's behaviors, and they do all the accommodating, and they kind of walk on eggshells, and they do everything they need to do. But in that situation, and in a situation where the kid's kind of running the classroom, it's still the same laws of behavior, the same laws of nature at work. Mm-hmm. And what I tell parents and what I tell teachers a lot of times, because it's true, is you're doing all the right things. We just need to rearrange the timing. They're giving a lot of attention to the behavior and a lot of effort. We just have to rearrange when you're doing that sometimes. And maybe we have to do a few other things too. And then I hear, well, it's going to be a lot of work. And I point out, you're already doing a lot of work. Look at all this stuff that you're doing to accommodate and to avoid and everything else. So yeah, when this happens, it's still the same laws of nature at work.
Yeah, I related a story several webinars back. I know it was when our speech path Lauren was on, because she had gone to this house with me one time. And it was a student we had both worked with for a long time, and we were having a lot more success with spontaneous language in the classroom than what they were at home. So we went and we did a home visit, and it was just kind of a surreal reality because this child had a big screen TV on her favorite show that played all day long. She had 3 iPads that were set up throughout the house, and she would just wander around, interact with one of the iPads for a few minutes. And then she must have had 300 to 400 little like figures, you know, the kind like you would get out of a Happy Meal or just an action figure. And they were set up just right all over her house. And if you moved one, they would get, you know, they would get probably a reaction from her, and she would insist on putting it back. But that's an example of complete loss of instructional control in my mind. All the reinforcement is coming from the child. She's dictating what she gets and the contingency in which she gets it from. And the reason why we were getting so much more spontaneous language out of her in the classroom was we had established instructional control because she had accepted the contingency that if she wanted something from us, like access to the iPad or access to maybe a tangible to play with, then there was a behavior that was dependent on. And we had pretty much established that we were the giver of all the good. And that motivated her to do the things that she didn't want to do when it came time to it, which may be like sitting down and doing a task at a desk. But certainly Katie, I know you've run this as well. We've had significant contrast in seeing the language of a kid in a classroom and then what the parents reporting spontaneous wise. We're seeing a lot of times because we do put that instructional control in place.
Absolutely. There's a huge difference with a lot of kids between home and school. And that's complicated to explain to parents, you know, if they're seeing something different and they're, you know, we're sending all these notes home about behaviors not happening or happening, because it goes both ways. Some parents are shocked that like, and this actually happened to me when I was teaching. I was like, your daughter is doing so well. And I gave all the praises and specifics and the gains that we're making and shared some data. And she was so surprised. She's like, oh my goodness, like it's just a nightmare at home. I was like, well, I wish I had known that sooner, because we could help get some of that constructional control going in the house as well, because it works everywhere. So
what you're talking about is people behaving different ways under different conditions or in different places. I behave differently when I am in the waiting room at NTB while my car is being serviced from how I behave at home with my dogs, you know, because when I'm with my dogs, I'm all Cooper, right? I'm doing all of this baby talk because my dogs are babies, of course, and that's the only way they can understand me. But I really don't talk to the guy at NTB that way, you know? And I sort of spread out on the sofa and just eat my potato chips and the crumbs get all over me on the sofa at home. I don't do that at NTB because there are different contingencies at play.
Right.
No one says, dude, that's weird, or anything like that to me when I'm at home. If I did it at NTB, they'd probably have something to say about it, or at least I'd get some looks. Well, it's the same thing with a kid who behaves in one way at home and a different way at school. You know, and again, it's these same laws of nature that are at work. They're the same laws. It's just some things get reinforced and attended to in one setting and different things in another setting. We're all capable of behaving more than one way.
So I think at this point we need to say, you said NTB 3 times. I really think they ought to be contributing to the broadcast.
They should, and they do great work. At least the one over here on Harper Drive in Woodbridge.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's, if you don't take anything else away from the ABA in the schools, is that you have to establish instructional control. When a student walks in your classroom, you don't just have it. You have to establish it, and you have to establish it sometimes in a different way for every single student. I think for my little shout out to my pre-K teachers out there, I think for you guys, that's probably one of the most challenging groups of students to establish instructional control, because they all come from just a wide, varied experience level. Some have had daycare, some have not had daycare, some have, been at a home where they were the only child and all the adult attention was just readily available for them. And then they come into a school system at the preschool level, and now they've got to share a story time with 20 other kids. I've got to share this really cool adult. So just like we differentiate math, differentiate reading, we've got to differentiate how we establish instructional control. And it's okay for it to look different. It's okay for sometimes it to be a little bit unequal. Equal is not always fair, and fair is not always equal when we're talking about this. And it will save you time in the long run if you put the work in at the very beginning to do that.
Well, and in a classroom or in school, even with parents, between parents and child, all instructional control means is that the adult says it, the kid does it. The task is placed before the kid does it. And nothing more than that. It's not some evil, sinister, mwahaha sort of thing. It's just, I say it, you do it. That only works when the other person is important to you, as you said in the beginning. I can become important to you by doing awful things or threatening awful things. And I only stop those things or don't do them if you do what I say. When that's the case, I will do the bare minimum to not get the awful thing to happen. Or I can be the giver of all things wonderful. I'm important to you. And you do what I ask, and you do what I instruct, and you do the task I place before you, because when you do that, wonderful things happen. And when we set up that sort of relationship, we don't get the bare minimum effort. That's when we get people going way above and beyond. And that's what we're after. For our students, for our spouses, for everyone.
Yeah. And it seems like such a simple thing, but there is this kind of old mindset of the school. And I think, Ted, you hit the nail on the head, right? Instructional control is simply just, I mean, obedience is probably the right, compliance would probably be a better word, you know?
Well, yeah, it's really just people doing what other people ask them to do.
Yeah, and there's the assumption in the school environment that you're going to do what I ask you to do because I'm the adult, because I'm the teacher, and that if that was a condition that ever existed, truly, and I think at some time, you know, time has kind of worn that out a little bit. It definitely doesn't exist now. I mean, when we look across the state, across even the nation, conversations I've had with SPED directors across the country, that this is a problem in all schools at all levels, and with students with disabilities and without students with disabilities. So ABA really does have an application, you know, from start to finish in the public school day.
And we're going to talk about trauma next week, but quite frankly, for some kids, the way they've survived is by not doing what adults have told them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's no surprise with these kids that they get to school, they don't follow instructions, they don't sit when it's time to sit, they don't do anything you ask them to do. And in their lives, that's what's gotten them to this point. That's their survival skill. So you can look at it as we have to get compliance. No, not really. We have to figure out what we need to do to get the kid doing what the kid needs to do. But that's very different from getting compliance.
Yeah. And then that reinforcement. And I think that probably after the week of trauma discussion, we'll cycle back around to reinforcement and schedules reinforcement and talk about the power of it. You know, when I think of ABA in schools and like the power of ABA in schools, if there's a power, Katie worked with a kid. And one of the things that we do, just kind of a bag of tricks, is balloons. We use balloons a lot. And a SPED coordinator walked in to see Katie kind of go over and interact with this kid with a balloon. And he was just wowed at the power of the balloon. You know, he would call it Katie and her magic balloon, you know.
Yeah, my reputation in that school division is just like balloons, yeah, which is okay because I love using balloons. Yeah. I will give, if I come into your classroom, if it works with your kids, I will hand you balloons.
So can I bill an insurance company for balloon therapy then?
Yeah, maybe. I will call balloon therapy.
Or we have a friend, Adam Dreyfus, who, you know, people see him doing, all he's doing is establishing instructional control by like attending to what people are doing right, even the slightest thing. And people act like it's magic and they call him the kid whisperer. Well, it's great for his ego, but it's just, you know, working with those laws of nature as they exist.
Yeah, and it gets to be pretty predictable. And I think someone in the chat was talking about many teachers don't have the language to express ABA principles. And I agree with that. And I think that this has been a great opportunity, a great platform over the past 7 weeks. If there is any silver lining to all this, is to provide a lot of professional development on these things, because make no mistake, parents do come in and talk about wanting ABA and ABA concepts. And sometimes parents bring their own BCBA in with them. And just, if you don't know, BCBA is what we are, as board certified behavior analyst. And we speak a different language sometimes. And I think you've got to be able to walk both sides of that fence and be able to use technical terms when necessary and non-technical terms when necessary. But I also think to advocate for yourself. When the parent starts talking about certain things that they want incorporated, you can use that language to say, look, I'm already doing that, and here's how, and have the data to back it up. So I think that is true. And I hope that we kind of, as we move forward with these kind of live sessions and the webinar trainings that we've done, and as we continue to push into public schools, that will expand that knowledge of teachers. I was just amazed this year at the number of incidences of really a lot of pressure towards the schools in getting formal ABA services in a child's IEP. Again, that one that I referenced earlier is the only one I know that's actually in. But one parent was actually wanting 7 hours, a full day of what they deemed as ABA therapy in the child's IEP. And I was in the meeting and I looked at the parent and I said, look, I'm a behavior analyst. I'm licensed to do applied behavior analysis, and I have absolutely no idea what 7 straight hours of ABA therapy would look like, other than a really unhappy kid and a really bored adult. So it is kind of changing this mindset of what ABA actually is.
And the kid can already have 6 or 7 hours of ABA in a school day anyway, because again, all applied behavior analysis is changing, is good teaching. All teaching is changing behavior. And if we pay attention to how we set up the math lesson, how we set up the spelling lesson, how we set up all of this stuff, what we attend to, what we don't attend to, this is applied behavior analysis. Throw in some data collection. This is applied behavior analysis. And to set it apart, I've in other schools and in other places, I've walked in and the child would have 15 minutes of ABA on the schedule. So the ABA therapist would come by for 15 minutes. And it's ABA time. I'm thinking, okay, so what, the laws of nature do not apply the rest of the day. And it's just a matter of not understanding that this is general stuff that's going on all day, every day. And we can actually, in the context of what we're already doing, do this stuff.
Yeah. And it makes it more natural outcomes, right? It doesn't produce that kind of robotic training that people sometimes associate with ABA. We want natural, very fluid outcomes with communication, with functional skills, academic skills. So I think kind of another segue, just we use a lot of technical terms when we talk and ABA jargon and stuff, but I think beyond instructional control, for me, one of the other things I think that we bring in that is extremely significant is this concept of practicing, the practice effect, right? That so often when we target behaviors in the schools, generally speaking, when classroom teachers target behaviors, the kids only have the opportunity to practice them when they absolutely have to. So like, I think of like a fire drill, right? The only time that we typically practice a fire drill is when a fire drill goes off. And that's kind of this shift, and it's probably a whole other discussion. I mean, schools changed, right? Like when I was in kindergarten, I remember taking tests on how to zip up my coat and how to tie my shoes. Well, now kindergartens are taking tests on writing and spelling words and reading words and doing calculus and things like that. So we don't contrive and set up these practice scenarios. Certainly when I go in, Katie, I don't know about you, I'm sure it's similar, but when I go and I work with a teacher, I start talking about how can we give the student opportunities to contact reinforcement, trying this skill over and over again without it being a real high stakes situation.
Yeah, definitely. And also when we're working on goals in your room with you, like, we're going to ask you, what are the behavioral issues? Like, what do you need from us? Like, what's your biggest concern? But also we can help you embed ABA instructional methods for anything you're doing. So if you're working on a couple IEP goals, like we will use ABA and help you understand what we are doing so that you can use it for all of your students and all of your IEP goals and any other goals that we suggest or that you have specifically for a target behavior. But yes, creating those opportunities all day is how you get the results that you want.
And teachers are already creating opportunities all day. It's called lesson plans.
Yeah, it's their whole lives. Yeah.
So it's a matter of you know, doing it in a particular way,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can actually, you know, arrange for students to do things that you can then attend to in a particular way, or that produce particular outcomes for the student. And I'm sorry, I'm blithering, but it's not that different. It's just a different way of doing things.
Yeah, and it's our job just to help give you some of that language to help, because
Yeah.
you're already doing it. We just want to help shape how you're thinking about it and give you the terms, honestly.
Yeah. One of the many things I do in my 85 jobs from my 85 degrees and everything is I do academic remediation, and I can get a kid over the course of a summer from first grade math through sixth grade math. And it's not magic. It's not Katie's balloon magic. All I'm doing is just, you know, methodically arranging for the child to, I break down the skills. You know, for example, I don't give the kid a bunch of subtraction problems involving borrowing on a worksheet and say, okay, let's do these. Instead, I'll give the kid a bunch of subtraction problems involving borrowing on a worksheet, and I will demonstrate for the first one just the borrowing. We're not going to solve the problem. We're just going to practice the borrowing. Second one, practice the borrowing. Third one, I demonstrate again. Fourth one, I coach the kid through it. Fifth one, I coach the kid through it. After that, kid pretty much has it. And we get really proficient, really good at the borrowing before we move on from there. But what this is like actually looking at the skills that make up the big behavior we want to teach and teaching them, you know, to make sure that the kid gets really good at them before we move on. You know, a lot of the kids who have behavior problems in school have academic problems in school. And one kind of feeds into the other, and it's sort of chicken and the egg maybe. But at some point you have to work on both. And it's amazing how when you solve the academic problems, the behavior problems very often take care of themselves.
Yeah, it's very true. And Ted, your point's well taken, right? Teachers, when we're talking about doing math, or we're talking about developing a writing assignment or something, we put that practice into play in our lesson plans. We have, you know, opportunities to get feedback on it, to get error correction on it, to get redirected on it, maybe have it modeled for us by the teacher. I think of when I was working in first grade classrooms, you know, I would always do a model on the smartboard of what I wanted the final product to be. And I would leave that there as a prompt for the students as they were working through it through the week before I would assess them on it at the end of the week. And we just naturally do that, which is completely ABA, right? For academic things. But when we start talking about some kind of more functional behavior, we tend not to plan for it as much. And one of the things that stands out in my mind is just simply transitions in the school day. I mean, I would have to say at least 25 to 30, maybe even higher % of things that we get involved in, Katie, I don't know where you are with that number, has to do with students not transitioning from either a preferred activity to a non-preferred activity, or from a preferred location back to a non-preferred location in the school.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about motivation. It's all about what they find motivating. And so we have to control that. Yeah.
Well, and regarding transition, you gotta look at transition from what to what.
Right.
Life getting better or worse as a function of this transition. You know, even if to you life doesn't look so great for the kid there who's kind of running amok in the cafeteria, you know, wait a second. What the kid has there is freedom of movement, kids making decisions, kids making choices, not the one you want to make, kids laughing, kids smiling, a lot of great things. Okay, time for this to stop. Let's watch single file in silence down the hall to go back to the classroom and get to work. who in their right mind wants to do that? You know, what this is life is good, life gets worse. None of us likes that transition. And so the way to fix it isn't to make life worse over here. The way to fix it is to make life good in both places.
Right.
So you're going from good to good. The way to make things good for a lot of our kids is to let them be right and teach them how to be right and notice how to be right. Chad, you mentioned putting that, leaving an example up on the board for the whole week. Well, for a lot of us, a lot of our students, a lot of my clients in my mental health practice, being right is a huge, huge reinforcer.
Right.
And for your students, once they're able to match that product on the board, they're right. They're absolutely right. And that's a reinforcer. And it makes it more likely they're going to do it again and again and again and again. You know, and so the more we can teach our people to be right, the more reinforcement we're building into their day. The problem is we have so many people who we call academic underachievers. That just means that we haven't noticed that we're like academic underteachers for these kids. And what they get is wrong, 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 wrong. And it's amazing that they keep coming back to school, you know, because it's just very little reinforcement there for them.
Yeah. And when
And
like
the way
that
to just help them be right.
when you think about the attention that they get, I mean, the attention that they get is usually for the behaviors we don't want to. So kind of cycling back around that transition, I love that kind of equilibrium thing that you've got there about going from a place that's really good and making the place that they're going to really good to make that transition more likely. So I know several instances where I've gotten in situations where a kid would run when it was time to come in from the playground. Well, I mean, to me, that's a pretty functional response. The playground's a lot of fun, and in the classroom is where, you know, I got to do all this other stuff I don't want to do. But the only time the kid ever had the opportunity to contact any type of reinforcement for coming in from the playground or from coming from another place in the classroom was that one time of day. And it was either this or not. And that's what they were keeping data on for the behavior plan, for the IEP. So create ways throughout the day, go different places. Don't make them purposeless. Make them have some kind of meaning. Have the student take a note to another teacher. You need to go get something from the office. Reasons why the student leaves the classroom, and then when they come back into the classroom, immediately reinforcing them with something that's fun, so that when they are on the playground and you give them that warning to come in or that cue to line up, they know, okay, well, yeah, I got to leave the playground, but when I get in the classroom, I'm going to be reinforced with this, so I'm okay with that. And then we gradually can fade that back. It doesn't have to look like that all year long, but that's much better than a student running away from you every single day that we're on the playground. And I think when I start thinking about, again, those barriers of ABA and just the concepts of reinforcement, it is some kind of those fixed mindsets of, I am not going to give a kid a fun activity just for coming in from the playground. Well, right now you're chasing the kid every time that you try to get him lined up, and that's pretty fun for him.
Yeah.
So I would rather him have that fun thing in the classroom where it's functionally appropriate. And then what we'll do is we'll gradually add one little task that he's got to do after he gets in the classroom. And we'll start small, maybe throw away a piece of paper, and then he gets the reinforcement. And then we'll build to maybe answering one question, and then he gets the reinforcement. And then we'll keep stretching that out. But sometimes we just cut off our nose to spite our face. And, you know, it really is about what the outcome is that we want from that student. So
I got to step away for a moment. Keep talking.
okay. Oh, I didn't have that problem. So, okay. I mean, like, I know you and I think this year probably, I feel like that's been a big focus of ours, is dealing with transitions and working with it. I mean, can you think of ways that we've used to support those?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think what you said is exactly what we typically start with for any transition. Yeah. So anytime, you know, like you said, we have to make sure there's a motivation and there's something reinforcing at that other end. And something we've really pushed in the beginning of the year, or if we're just entering your classroom, is setting up stations and setting up those transitions. And you're going to start with transitioning from preferred to preferred, because all you're looking for is to teach them how to transition. And we teach new behaviors by heavily reinforcing them. And so, and then like Chad said, we fade it back. So we have to start there. Kids don't just automatically know how to transition, especially we see that in like kindergarten. We have to set up those things and to teach them, and it has to be heavily reinforced. And then again, we can slowly fade it back so they are more successful and don't need as much reinforcement, but we have to start somewhere. So.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, a great point. I wasn't really thinking about it is that, you know, when you think about self-contained classrooms in general, and kind of preschool would fall under that in a way in my mind, because everything's kind of contained into that preschool world. But our self-contained learners, our adaptive learners, that is the place that they play. That is the place that a lot of times they eat. It's the place that they receive instruction, and it's the place where they receive a lot of attention, all in that one classroom. So it's really important in your environmental design that you take that into consideration, because if you think about trying to go into a kid's bedroom where all his toys are, and where he's associated play with, and then just have him sit down and do what he conceives to be work, that's really hard, right? So it's important that we contrive the environment so that we can teach those transitions in kind of smaller distances, so that when we look at them from a larger perspective of transitioning locations to the classroom or from the school itself, that it's a lot easier. And what Katie was talking about was, I think it was the very first year that we met, and we had set up a situation in a classroom where we had 5 stations, and at every 5 stations, there was something that student really preferred. I don't know if you remember the kid I'm thinking about.
I did
really
that with a couple, so like I'm not, yeah.
I'm thinking
But
of
yeah.
Well,
Yes. Yeah, I got you.
yeah, we were trying to decrease the avoidance time going from table to table, because there was really good stations set up, but the student's not going to move to them, then it really doesn't serve a lot of purpose. So they set up just fun activities at each table, and he would just rotate. So what
we have to pair those tables, and we have to pair those places where we're expecting to get a lot of work done, a lot of instruction. We have to pair those places with good things, with reinforcement. Because without that, like Ted said, like I don't want to go to that table. I know every time I sit at that table, I yell, I scream, I throw something, I get a lot of negative attention, but still attention, and I have to work, like, ugh. So yeah.
So we have to make the tables a reinforcement. The table's the place to be. Tables are in place, like the box on my kitchen table for my cat. Best place. Yeah. But what we also have to make be a reinforcer is that feeling of, this is getting hard. This is getting more difficult. You know, we do this. I do on my phone, I do my old man Sudoku games, and I don't start with the easy ones because they're not fun. I start, and I don't do the real hard ones first, because who wants to? I go with the ones that are in the middle, because it's just the right amount of difficult. Because that difficult, if it's too difficult, who wants to? Too easy, nah. But when it's the right amount of difficult, what you feel is, this is a challenge, this is good. CrossFit, why do people go to CrossFit? Why do people work out? You know, the muscle gain and everything, that's way down the road. What am I getting right now? You know, what happens is that feeling, that pain, that discomfort itself becomes a conditioned reinforcer. When it hurts, when it's uncomfortable, just the right way. You know you're doing it the right way, and being right is a reinforcer. Well, what I love with the kids who I work with doing academic remediation, and teachers get this to happen all day in their classrooms for a lot of kids without knowing it, is that feeling that this is difficult, this is getting harder, itself becomes a reinforcer, because that's what precedes getting it right, right? So if getting it right is a reinforcer, and that feeling comes right before it, that feeling becomes a reinforcer, and that's how you get people to keep working when stuff gets difficult. But you can only get that to happen if the kid can be right. So you got to teach at the kid's actual instructional level, not at what the 7th grade curriculum is. If the kid is doing math at the 1st grade level, you got to start where the kid is.
Yeah, and I think that if we were to talk about another term that we use a lot in ABA that really is so important in schools is just that, and it's shaping, right? It's accepting like less refined versions of the behavior progressively until we get what we want. And I think the workout example is a fantastic one. Last year, we have a 10-mile run here in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I barely survived it. Made it across the finish line, but it was tough. But as I was training for that, if I had just like walked out the door and tried to do 10 miles, I probably would never do it again. Or I probably would like never gotten to the 10-mile race because it would have hurt so bad, right? Like, and my body wasn't ready for it. But by doing little bits at a time and progressively getting reinforced a little bit more for more effort, I was able to do that whole behavior. And I think what Ted said is really, really correct. And Katie, it kind of inherited a couple situations when she was teaching where the kids just never got to reinforcement because the expectations were that the behavior be perfect. It looked perfect every single time. And that's just not how we teach. We gotta reinforce the little approximations, and that's what shaping is. And yeah, I know, like I'm thinking of a couple students that you work with in general that were just asked to do too much for too long of a period of time before they got reinforcement. And when you came in, you kind of modified that.
Yeah, and we do that with bin systems. I think also the best example, or the one I typically use, is math. Like if you have a math worksheet, you might want to cut up the math worksheet into strips and have one or two questions at a time and start with the easier ones. So that they're reaching that reinforcement more often. You're pairing yourself, you're establishing that reinforcement is reachable and it's doable and that they can do it. So you're increasing their confidence. You have more instructional control, and ultimately you will get to the target behavior without having to do all of those steps. But you really do, you have to start somewhere.
Or you could do, yeah, I do one, you do one. I do one, you
yeah.
do one.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
What you're talking about there is decreasing the response effort is the big fancy term. But the more difficult stuff is, the less likely we're able to do it. If I have to bend at the waist to reach down to the floor and pick up that thing all the way down to the floor, who has time for that? But if I drop it on the table, and so I only have to do a little bit of bend, I'm more likely to do that. That's why my floor is a mess. You give me something with 85 math problems on it, no. You give me 2, okay, I can do this. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to think about how we're presenting tasks and how that task demand can affect and trigger some behaviors, because that's typically what we see.
But you get to that doing the 85 math problems. Chad gets to that 10 miles.
Yes.
And I will eventually pick up everything on my floor.
There you go.
Pick it up and bring it to you when you're lying on the couch eating chips.
Well, I'm waiting for the dogs to just eat it.
Yeah.
I think that we would be remiss in saying, as adults, I make mistakes all the time. My behavior is not perfect all the time. And if we never had the opportunity to kind of contact reinforcement for approximations and correct things as we go along, we would never survive. As a teacher, I made mistakes constantly. That was some of my best learning opportunities. So I think as ABA does come into school, that mindset of shaping has to be something that teachers embrace. I don't need the exact behavior right now. I can take a little bit and reinforce it. I can take a little bit more, then reinforce it a little bit more. Until we get to where that student is being more successful and reaching that model that's on the smartboard.
And also it's reinforcing for you as a teacher to see your student doing well. So if they're happy, even though you've lowered the task demand and you're not at that level that you're wanting to get at, again, you have to start somewhere, but it's reinforcing for you to give that reinforcement and to see that smile and to see that they're doing well. And then, that's a reinforcer for you. Because if you're a teacher, you thrive off of those wins, right? And so you have to, especially in self-contained, take every tiny gain as something huge. Like celebrate it with your staff, celebrate it with all of your kids. Like it's hugely important that you feel reinforced too, because the students pick up on how you're feeling as well.
If you've had kids in preschool, I did a long time ago when my kids were little, nothing is better than when they bring home from preschool that really amateurish project, that poorly constructed project that they made themselves in school. Because you know that they made it with their own little hands and they did the best they could.
Mhm.
What is the opposite of that is when they bring home the perfectly constructed Thanksgiving turkey made out of paper plates and feathers from construction paper and everything. Because, you know, they didn't do that. The teacher did that.
Yep.
That instructional assistant did that. What we're talking about here is the difference between the process and the product. Learning is a process. Shaping is a process. Getting to that, being able to run 10 miles is a process. The product is what comes at the end. We'll get to that product, but if what we're doing is just moving the person through the motions to get that product, we're not teaching, we're essentially puppeteering. You know, or if it's kind of like you may as well, you know, put the guy with the aneurysm on the table in front of the 8-year-old and say, do brain surgery now. Not good for anyone, right? Something you kind of want to shape and you work up to.
Yeah. So, you know, kind of transitioning from that, and the other thing I think that I wanted to kind of hit on as we look at what ABA brings into the school is just that data mindset. A conversation I have so often with SPED directors is my people aren't keeping data, my people aren't keeping data. And then I usually go back to them and I said, no, that's not really where the fault line is. The fault line is that they're not doing anything with it. They're not using the data to make decisions about how they're going to deliver instruction, how they're going to modify things. Really good example of that. The other day I was working on the construction of an IEP with the teacher, and we're going through the present levels, and I've worked with the student a lot. I kind of had a good sense of what he could do mathematically. And, you know, I was asking her, I'm sorry, it was reading comprehension. It showed that he had 60% accuracy on reading comprehension when given a story and then asked questions about the story. And I said, okay, well, what does that mean? What exactly did you set up? So he basically read a short story, and then he had 2 choices to choose from when she gave him the answer. So what I said to her was, well, what that kid can actually do is get 60% of the time correct when he's given a 50 chance at getting it correct. So how valid is that data actually? And when I think about contentious IEPs and just in general about how we make decisions of where a student ends up instructionally, I think about that data that ends up in the present levels. That 60% accuracy is not always 60% accuracy if you had a 50-50 shot at getting it right. Like I think about even when I was in elementary school and I had multiple choice tests, SOLs, there's always at least four choices. So you've really got to think about the validity of the data that you're reporting. I think that's one thing that we bring in to the schools is a little bit more analytical perspective on data that we're keeping, and we can kind of help shape that teacher's behavior and how they keep data and how they use it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest struggles. I mean, I struggled with that when I was just starting teaching. Luckily, I was studying it and I had resources and I had you, and I had all of the resources to correctly collect data. But a lot of people don't have that much guidance and don't have people to go to ask, like, hey, this is what I was thinking. Does this actually make sense now that I'm looking at it, even though I'm like 2 months in, like, I don't know. And so that's what we're here for. We're here to help you collect the correct data so that we have valid data to work from, so that we can actually use it to help you in your classroom. It's not some cumbersome thing that you're just supposed to have this binder that people can look at just to prove that you're doing stuff. It's supposed to help you, and it's gonna give you ideas for lesson plans, and it's gonna show you how to group your students and based on level and what their goals are. And so it can be extremely helpful once you feel confident in how you're collecting it. And all we want to do is help give you those skills.
The data are a tool. Right?
Yeah.
It's a tool. It's kind of like a hammer. It's kind of like an expensive table saw that you buy at Home Depot.
Yeah.
And, you can buy the table saw because you have a lot of great intentions and it's in the basement and it's been there 3 years and you've never used it. If that's your data, there's no point to it, right? Or Katie, as you were saying, if the only reason why you're taking the data is because someone's making you take the data, and if you don't do it, bad things will happen. So you have a binder full of data that never gets used for anything other than avoiding the bad thing. Okay, it's good for that purpose, but it's not really helpful. Keep taking it because you want to keep your job, but it's not really helpful.
Yeah,
Where
and once you
data
start to
is-
figure out how to use it, you'll be excited about it because it's actually helping you.
Yeah, what you want is data that is going to help you make good decisions and move things along quicker and keep things going in the right direction. And so it doesn't have to be elaborate, doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to be good enough. You don't need a pretty hammer, you don't need a sexy wrench. You need a hammer that gets the job done. You need a wrench that'll get that bolt off. That's all you need. And that's what data are like.
Yeah, and shameless plug for EBCS. I mean, like if we're supporting your school division and we come in to your classrooms, it's one of the things that we do. We kind of help you kind of look at your data, how you're collecting it, and we want you to be efficient with it. We don't want it to be something that bogs you down. We can take it and make it, as BCBAs, we can take it and make it look fancy and sexy and like visual graphs and different colors. And
We would love to graph your data.
yeah, we actually, we live for graphing data. It just,
Parents love it. You can present it and they'll be like, wow, visuals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the graph should really just sum everything up. It should be this quick look that really kind of ties everything together. But the other thing I just want to touch on, Ted, because I can't remember what you said that cued me on to it, but the role of data is also not to justify how bad that kid is.
Oh, right.
And if I have like one real massive frustration level when I come into a situation is having this like memoir plopped down in front of me, and it's like a stack of papers this thick of just narrative data about how bad this kid is. Okay, yes, I get it. The kid is having behavioral problems, but if we're just keeping data over and over again about the problem behavior, when are we ever actually doing anything about it? We've got to move into starting to try something. And I would say that if it's a endangering behavior, whether it endangers other people or endangers the student, we need to start something right away. We don't just keep collecting data to show that there's a problem. That's not the role of it.
Well, a couple things there. One, sometimes people mistake data collection for actually doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our problem because we haven't explained it properly.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of data collection is to see what's going on and nothing more, just to see what's going on. And you could enter into that with a bias and you could collect data to justify a particular position. Frankly, we see that in political polls all the time. You can see this candidate has this much of an approval rating, but the other candidate has this much. Well, if you ask the right people, you're going to get this much and this much. You ask a different group, you're going to get the opposite effect, right? If you just go into it looking to see what's going on as a good behavior analyst and a good teacher would, it's not going to be collecting data to justify how bad the kid is and how bad the behavior is, and we need to move them out of here. Because frankly, if you follow anyone long enough, you're going to find them doing something wrong.
That's right.
Instead, it's going to be getting a count of how often it happens, when it happens, the circumstances under which it happens. It's going to give you a whole lot of other data that'll probably help you figure out the things you have to change to help that behavior to change. And that's entirely different.
Can I just come with the new company motto? I love that statement. Don't mistake data collection for doing something. I love
that is nice. Another good t-shirt.
Yeah. I mean, I think we overkeep data. I mean, I know, Kate, you've probably seen that too. Just like you've seen actually a lot of data, but nothing done with it, right?
Yeah. And it's not something we're there to be like bad data, not good. No. Because it shows that you're trying. Like, that's fantastic. If I see any kind of data, I'm like, awesome, we can work with this. That's fantastic. And so Cami in our chat said, I think that there's, that's where she has difficulty, how to quickly take data so she can analyze it. And that's another part of data collection. We're not going to come in there and ask you to take narrative ABC data all day on one behavior. We're going to pick a time. We're going to talk about the best time to take it, the easiest way. It's going to be frequency. You're going to be tallying, or duration, how long. If we need more complicated data, we can help you with that. But for the most part, it's got to be reasonable, right? It's got to be sustainable, so that we can use it and that it is understandable. So that's a huge thing, Cami, in every room that we're in. I get that, like, I just don't have time to sit down and with this massive, binder or my clipboard and take all this data while I'm actually trying to teach. It's like, yeah, of course not. This sounds really hard. So making it simple and effective is key.
So in my mind, I mean, the purpose of data, as for me as an educator and even as a BCBA, is again, as a BCBA, I think of myself as teaching, right? And educating students on whether it be academic skills, functional skills, whatever. But the purpose is to show what I'm doing is working. Like that they're acquiring. That should be the role of that data collection.
The purpose is to figure out if what I'm doing is working.
Yeah, and if it's not,
They'll presume something.
And then do something else. Yeah.
Because what we do as behavior analysts, what teachers do all the time, frankly, it's time to just drop the ego. What we're doing is we're just testing to see if these procedures are getting us what we need. And so I'm okay, you're okay, the students are okay, we're all fine. We're just going through life testing these procedures. And the data will tell us if we got the right procedures or if we need to change the procedures.
Yeah,
and
we're not always right. Like, that's why we have data. That's why we take it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so and this was Cami again that she was talking about in the chat. She feels like she's not teaching when she's collecting data, and I get that, because I see some of these forms that you guys are working off of in the classroom, and it's like reading a book almost. We can certainly talk about ways to make it more fluid. I mean, even teaching a self-contained classroom, I was able to create ways of collecting data that didn't interfere with an instruction. And kept everybody rolling along. So
yeah, it could be a sticky note. It could be, one of those clickers. We know
and
that
you already have a lot of data collection in classroom.
Yeah.
Every answer your student writes on a worksheet, every mark the student makes, those are all permanent product data, right? It's great to get your students to collect their own data. But you're already getting some data too. When you check off the stuff got done, yep, there's data. We make a mistake by giving someone some big cumbersome thing. We may as well put move like a 10-foot by 10-foot by 10-foot machine in their office or in their classroom, because it's that cumbersome what teachers are given sometimes, and it's nuts. It's just a tool. Nothing more.
Said, I'm so sorry. Cami said she tends to take it after the kids leave. Yeah, if your data collection is simple enough, it's just like a tally, and you can do that in your head and you're confident about it, and you're just transferring it right after, absolutely, that's fantastic. I know sometimes you can't do that just because it's confusing, or you want to make sure you're not missing anything. But if it's something simple that you're used to and you've done a lot, yeah, that's absolutely okay.
As long as you actually did keep something when the kid was actually still there. So where I see teachers do ABC narrative data, and for me as BCBA, it's just not ABC narrative data, is if you at the end of the day write down the ABC narrative data, that is a reflection and it's not data collection.
It's journaling. Yeah.
And it may actually be a good, just kind of self-help tool for yourself, kind of get some stuff out there. But it's impossible for our feelings and emotions not to kind of creep into that reflection. So data needs to take place in some form while the behavior is actually occurring, whether we're talking about the behavior we want or the behavior we're trying to reduce. And so, with that, it's almost 10:30, and I feel like we could keep talking, which is good because we've got these Zoom things scheduled for, until COVID goes away. Who knows? 9:30 to 10:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Next Tuesday, we're back with, we're going to start talking about some trauma in schools and how to interact with it and deal with it, and maybe help change some perspective a little bit in how we view trauma. But one thing I would like to leave you with, and I'll let Ted and Katie throw out a last word, is when we talk about ABA in schools, and when I do trainings in front of teachers, a lot of the pushback that I get from teachers is simply, well, the kids just should do what I tell them to do because, or the kids should just behave because those are the rules. And we come in with this mindset that, yeah, that would be great. That's a perfect world, right? But it's not the world that we're living in right now. in schools. And if you need any evidence of that, just go to any school in any division. Everybody is struggling with behavior. And I just think that from the perspective of applied behavior analysis and my perspective and our company's perspective in general, it's not that the child can't do what you're asking them to do. It's that they haven't learned how to do it yet, or they haven't learned how to do it functionally appropriately yet, or appropriate to that environment. They may still be lounging out in the waiting room at NTB while they wait for their car. You know, they haven't distinguished and discriminated between environments. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we continue these talks, that it is truly a matter of finding a way to teach these skills to our students, just like we would teach any other academic skill. You guys have anything you want to leave with for the day?
Yeah, and I just think to wrap that up, we teach those through reinforcement. I mean, just a ton of reinforcement in a very specific way, depending on what we're working on. But we did have a question about office hours. So they have started.
So if you're one of our supported school divisions, and I think this is the PAM I'm thinking you are, we do have office hours that you can book us for 30-minute consult sessions, and a sign-up genius went around your SPED directors. If by chance you didn't get that sign-up genius, you're welcome to send me an email, and I'll be happy to send it out to you. Ted, did you want to leave them with anything? A little preview?
Well, just again, you know, this isn't a matter, this isn't something to take personally. You know, this is a matter of testing the procedures. You're all good teachers. I'm an okay behavior analyst. I'm an okay teacher. Chad and Katie are good teachers. Our students are good students, even when they drive us nuts. You know, we're all worthy. We're all okay. What the work is about is testing the procedures.
Mm-hmm.
Figuring out which procedures get the student to do the things that are going to be useful in that student's life. That's all teaching is, right? Doing things that help make someone else's life better. And it's not about me having to be right. It's about me getting to those procedures that work best.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks again for joining in. I hope we had some people live on Facebook. I don't know. I'll have to go back and check that. But if you have teacher friends across the country, tell them to tune in. I think this stuff will resonate with everyone. Again, they are free every Tuesday, Thursday. Next week, we're going to be on the subject of trauma in schools, but not just like, well, the kids got a trauma, so we can't do anything with them. We can't teach them, but we're going to talk about, how to look at it with different lens perspective. And then the following week, I think we're going to cycle back around to the power of reinforcement and the power of schedules of reinforcement. We should be able to have some fun conversations about that, I think. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. And remember to like us on Facebook. Our YouTube channel's up, and these videos will be on the YouTube channel. And get the word out if you can. We appreciate you guys and everything you're doing.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Everyone, love you.